On a morning in 1470, in the mountains of Thessaly, something died without ever having lived, and everything that followed was born from that death. The bell of St. Catherine's convent had rung for 140 years. Every morning before dawn, its voice crossed the valley like a question asked to heaven. The nuns who pulled its rope had changed. Abbesses had come and gone. Wars had been fought in the valleys below. Empires had risen and crumbled. But the bell remained faithful. That April morning, Sister Elani stood in the bell tower as she had stood on thousands of mornings before. She was 63 years old, with hands that had touched plague victims, delivered babies in impossible births, and held the hands of dying villagers when their own families wouldn't dare approach. Her knees ached from the stone stairs. Her eyes had weakened over decades of candlelit prayer. But her hands, those remarkable hands, still pulled the rope with the same reverence they had learned when she first arrived at the convent 30 years earlier, fleeing a village that no longer existed. She didn't know it would be the last time. Below her in the valley, the horizon had stopped looking like dawn. The sky wore the wrong color, not the soft amber of morning, but the rust red of blood-soaked banners. From her tower window, Elani could see them moving, not marching because marches suggest rhythm and order. This was different. This was flowing, the way water flows downhill, inevitable and without mercy. The Ottoman army didn't appear in a single moment. It accumulated. First, dust on the horizon, then the sound of hooves drumming the earth like a massive heart, then the glint of steel catching morning light, then the smell, horse sweat, metal oil, and something else. The smell of a machine designed to disassemble the world. Sister Elani gripped the bell rope. She could feel the weight of it in her palms, the slight dampness of early morning moisture, the frayed places where hundreds of hands before hers had gripped in wind and rain and snow. She understood, with a clarity that felt almost like grace, that this bell would not ring tomorrow. This understanding did not come as fear. It came as a kind of completion, as if her entire life had been leading to this single moment of witnessing. She pulled the rope one final time. The bell sang, high and clear, a note that seemed to hold the sun in place for just a moment. It rang across the valley toward the distant mountains. It rang across 30 years of prayer. It rang across all the mornings and all the sorrows and all the quiet faith of women who had chosen a life beyond the world's reach. Below in the cloister courtyard, 22 other women heard it. They heard it the way a condemned person hears their own name spoken aloud for the last time. Some of them began to move toward the chapel, following the rhythm worn into their bodies by decades of obedience. Others simply stood still, their hands catching the light as morning crept across the stone. One of them was Sister Magdalena. She was 21 years old, though in that moment she might have been ancient. She had arrived at St. Catherine's 5 years earlier, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a silence that no one had ever been able to break. The soldiers had come to her father's farm on a day when the sky was the same color as the sky now was. They had come for supplies. When supplies ran short, they had decided people could serve as supplies too. She had hidden in a grain silo for 3 days before running. The convent had taken her in not out of charity, but out of recognition. They knew what it meant to carry a weight that language could not hold. On that morning, when Elani rang the bell for the last time, Magdalena was working in the herb garden. Her hands were in soil made rich by centuries of tending. She had just planted new seedlings of calendula, the golden flowers the women used for salves to treat the rare villagers who braved the climb to the convent seeking healing. The plants would never flower. The women who planted them would never harvest them. The salves would never be made. She heard the bell and stood up. She did not run toward it. She did not cry. She simply stood very still, earth under her fingernails, and waited. They arrived like a plague of locusts, except locusts are silent. The Ottomans brought the sound of consequence. The first cannonball didn't announce itself with mercy. It announced itself with truth. The bell tower took the impact at its base, and the sound that followed was not like an explosion, but like a scream. That particular scream a beautiful thing makes when it dies too quickly to understand what has happened to it. Stone came apart into fragments. The bell itself, which had rung since 1330, separated from its moorings and fell in slow motion before smashing into the courtyard below. Fragments of brass scattered like coins, One piece landed at Magdalena's feet, still vibrating with the last note it would ever make. 23 women stood in silence as Ottoman soldiers poured through the gates like water finding low ground. What happened next was worse than violence, because it wasn't violence. It was accounting. The soldiers came with ledgers, not swords. They came with quills and ink, and an almost mathematical indifference to the women before them. An officer named Hasan Pasha, a name that would appear in Ottoman military records, now buried in archives most historians never reach, observed the nuns the way a merchant observes inventory. He was a professional. The conquest of territory was business. The conquest of souls was simply a more sophisticated business transaction. Through a translator, a Greek man whose voice shook with shame at what he had become, Hasan Pasha delivered the Sultan's mercy: convert, provide service to the Ottoman household, accept new names, new lives, new identities, refuse, and face the consequences of rebellion against the sublime authority. It was not actually a choice, it was a script, and choices require alternatives. Sister Elani stepped forward. She was not angry. She was not defiant in the way heroes in stories are defiant. She was simply calm, the way a person is calm after they have already died inside and are merely completing formalities. She spoke in Greek so that every soldier could understand. "We have already given our lives to a king higher than your sultan. There is nothing left in us to surrender." Hasan Pasha smiled. It was not the smile of a man about to deliver cruelty. It was the smile of a man about to teach a lesson that no empire had ever failed to teach once it was truly determined to teach it. That night, the nuns were locked inside their own chapel. No food, no water, just darkness and the sound of soldiers outside, eating, laughing, the casual sounds of men who knew they had already won. The younger sisters began to weep. Their tears echoed off stone walls that had heard thousands of prayers, but never tears like these. Tears not of devotion, but of the body's simple recognition that it was about to be broken. Magdalena began to whisper a psalm, not loudly, not as defiance, simply as memory preserved in sound. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Her voice was so faint that at first no one heard it, but slowly, so slowly that it might have been accidental, the other voices joined her. Not in unison, not like singing, like memory becoming chorus, like individual suffering recognizing itself in others and finding, in that recognition, something that could not be destroyed by hunger or fear or the weight of empire. The soldiers heard it. Some of them looked away. Years later, one of them would tell his grandson about the Christian women who sang to their God in darkness, and his grandson would dismiss it as an old man's romanticism. But the old man would remember that moment, not as meaning something, but as meaning nothing could mean anything anymore, that some things simply were. On the fourth morning, when the doors opened, the nuns were given rope to bind their wrists. Not iron shackles. Rope was more cruel because it was less final. Rope suggested that they might yet be saved, that they might yet escape, that their restraint was not inevitable but chosen, if only they chose to accept it. They walked south toward the coast. 23 women. Hasan Pasha rode a horse alongside them, not rushing them. There was no reason to rush. They were already moving toward their destination. Time was on his side. The road was punishment in itself. By the second day, Sister Irene collapsed. She was 62, her knees having failed her for years. The other women lifted her between their bodies and carried her. For 3 miles, their own exhaustion became secondary to the weight of her. This was not religious devotion. This was something deeper, a refusal to abandon the body of another woman, even at the price of their own survival. By nightfall, Irene was unconscious. By dawn, she was gone. The sisters buried her by the roadside with their bound hands, scraping shallow graves in earth that would forget her by the next season. Hasan Pasha made a notation in his ledger. 22 remaining. The reduction of a human being to an arithmetic problem. On the 4th day of the march, Sister Callista simply stopped walking. She had been silent since the siege began. True silence, not the spiritual silence of contemplation, but the silence of a soul that has decided it will no longer accommodate the world. She sat down in the middle of the road, closed her eyes and stopped moving. The soldiers didn't beat her, they didn't torture her, they simply left her there. By the time they reached the port of Volos 7 days later, 18 women remained from the original 23. But something had shifted during those 7 days, something Hasan Pasha had not anticipated. The women stopped weeping. They stopped begging. They stopped offering resistance that could be measured or noted in a ledger. Instead, they walked in silence. Not the silence of defeat, the silence of women who had already made a choice that no empire could unmake. On the morning of the 7th day, Hasan Pasha called for Elani. She was brought to his tent alone. What happened in that tent would never be recorded in Ottoman military documents. Ottoman records exist to measure conquests, victories, the expansion of empire. They do not record the small murders of soul. They do not document the specific techniques by which a person can be destroyed from the inside while remaining alive on the outside. What we know comes from a letter written by a Venetian merchant who was detained in Constantinople for ransom in those years. He witnessed Elani's return to the camp at dawn. His words, preserved in Dubrovnik archives and discovered only in 2003, are these: "I saw them bring her back at dawn, and I understood in that moment why some horrors live longer than others. She could not walk. They had to carry her. But what destroyed me to witness was her eyes. Her eyes were open. They were looking directly ahead, but she was not in them anymore. Something had been taken. They dressed her in silk. I saw them do it with my own hands, and paraded her through the camp. They called her a convert, but I heard her lips moving. She was still praying, still forming words in a language they had tried to erase from her throat. She had not broken. They had simply taken her body and left her soul somewhere behind, wandering lost in a darkness she would spend the rest of her life trying to return to. This was the true Ottoman strategy, the one history books don't teach because it's harder to understand than conquest. Hasan Pasha and men like him understood something fundamental. Martyrs inspire resistance. Dead saints become immortal. Songs are written about them. Stories are told and retold. But a broken woman, a living ghost, a person whose body functions while their soul remains shattered, that is a warning that works better than any threat. The nuns were loaded onto a galley at Volos, a warship with rows of benches bolted to the deck, and chains anchored into wood, worn smooth by generations of captives. The ship's manifest, discovered in 1987 in the Ottoman Palace archives in Istanbul, lists them not by name but by category. Religious captives, female 18. Destination, imperial household. Purpose, domestic service and conversion. That word, service, was doing work far beyond its meaning. 12 days at sea. The voyage was designed not as a journey but as erasure, a crossing that would remove them from everything they had known and deposit them in a place so alien that memory itself might fail. The sea was not kind. Storms came from nowhere and everywhere. Salt spray burned their lips. The ship pitched and rolled beneath them. The nuns, who had never seen an ocean before, vomited until their bodies had nothing left to give. They remained chained to the benches by wrists locked in iron rings. Around them, other prisoners, Greeks, Serbs, Italians, Armenians, sat in the same darkness, wearing the same chains. At night, Magdalena whispered psalms, not loudly, not as prayer, as music perhaps, or as resistance so quiet that it could exist in the space between one heartbeat and another. Her voice was faint enough to be easily missed, but the other prisoners heard it anyway. The Greeks recognized fragments of their own liturgy. The Italians heard the Latin and understood its meaning even without language. For a few hours each night, the hold of the galley became something other than a place of captivity. It became a cathedral made of suffering, and that suffering, when witnessed and acknowledged, transformed into something that resembled hope. On the 12th day, the ship entered the Bosphorus, and the women saw Constantinople for the first time. The city rose before them like something from another world. Domes and minarets and walls that seemed to stretch impossibly into the sky. It had been called the City of the World's Desire for centuries. Now, for these 18 women, it would become their cage. As the ship docked and the soldiers began unshackling them for the march through the city, one of the nuns whispered words that none of them would ever forget. "We are home, but it is no longer ours." The palace of the Sultan stretched across the peninsula like a second city. But the 18 women were not taken to the grand halls where ambassadors walked and viziers conspired. They were taken down stone stairs that spiraled into darkness, down through tunnels that smelled of damp stone and generations of decay, down into a place that didn't officially exist. It was a small room, perhaps 20 feet by 20 feet, with a single window cut so high and covered so thoroughly with iron bars that almost no light reached it. For months, perhaps longer, perhaps years, these women lived as invisible servants. By day, they scrubbed floors in chambers they were not permitted to see. They washed linens stained with the blood and wine of Ottoman nobility. They tended fires in rooms whose purposes remained foreign to them. They moved through the palace like ghosts, dressed in grey, forbidden to speak, their presence acknowledged only as one acknowledges a necessary inconvenience. But at night, when the palace slept and the guards grew careless, 18 women gathered in that small room beneath the earth. They had no Bible, no priest, no altar. They had only memory, and memory proved to be enough. They recited psalms, reconstructing them from fragments recalled and reassembled over years of prayer. Verses half forgotten were reshaped into prayers that kept them alive. They sang hymns in whispers so faint that even the stone seemed to absorb the sound rather than carry it. They held communion with bread stolen from the kitchens and water drawn from palace wells, and they carved their faith into the walls, with fingernails, with shards of broken pottery, with pieces of their own bones worn thin and sharpened by months of determined resistance. They carved crosses, small and crude and beautiful. They carved them knowing that no one would see them. They carved them anyway. Sister Magdalena became the keeper of this secret chapel. She had carried Sister Irene on the road. She had refused to look away when they brought Sister Elani back broken and remade. She had whispered psalms into the hold of a ship while men around her despaired. Now she became their archivist, their documentarian of small refusals. She drew a bird on the wall, a simple image scratched with something sharp and desperate. Beside it she began to draw lines, 23 lines, one for each sister who had walked 7 days through hell. But as the months passed and sisters disappeared, vanishing into the machinery of the palace, the lines stopped growing. 21, then 19, then 11. And then the lines stopped altogether. In the corner of her bird she scratched 2 words in Greek, 2 words that we know about only because archaeologists found them in 2011, beneath layers of Ottoman paint and nearly 5 centuries of attempted erasure. We endure. But it was more than endurance. It was something deeper than that. It was refusal. It was the insistence that a human being cannot be completely conquered, that something always remains, some kernel of consciousness that exists beyond the reach of chains and hunger and the weight of empire. These women were not heroes in the way history imagines heroes. They were simply women who had decided that they would not disappear completely. If they must vanish from the world, they would at least leave a mark that proved they had existed. On the wall, they carved, "Lux in tenebris lucet." The light shines in the darkness. By 1482, 12 years after the women had arrived at the palace, Ottoman records mention a cleansing of the palace staff. Anyone deemed unproductive or resistant was removed. No details were provided. No names were recorded. No burial sites were documented. Just a single line in a ledger written in neat Ottoman script: disposed. The 18 women who had walked 7 days through a hostile landscape. The 18 women who had crossed the sea in chains. The 18 women who had carved prayers into stone in absolute darkness. All of them gone. But the chapel remained. In 2011, during restoration work at Topkapi Palace, archaeologists broke through a false wall that had been sealed for centuries. Inside, they found a room that should not have existed. Its walls were covered with crosses, perhaps 100 of them, carved into the stone in various stages of completion. Some were careful and precise. Others were frantic, desperate, cut deep into the rock as if carved with terrible urgency. And beneath those crosses, barely visible now, worn almost translucent by 500 years, the Latin words remained: Lux in tenebris lucet. The archaeologists found traces of wax that wasn't Ottoman wax. It was older, mixed with herbs, the kind of candles nuns made in convents. This meant they had kept their vigil for longer than anyone thought possible. Months. possibly years. They had gathered night after night in absolute darkness and refused to stop believing, refused to stop carving, refused to disappear completely. The Ottoman Empire lasted 600 years. It conquered 3 continents. It rewrote maps and languages and entire cultures. It transformed the greatest cathedral in Christendom into a mosque. It ruled from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia. But it couldn't erase 18 women who scratched prayers into stone. An empire with armies and cannons and endless resources and the will to reshape the world itself. Against 18 women with fingernails and faith, and the women won. Not in the way empires measure victory. They never reclaimed their convent, never converted their captors, never lived to see freedom. But they won in the way that matters most. They left a mark. History is written by the victors, but memory is written by those who refuse to disappear. In 1712, a French diplomat visited Constantinople and heard rumors among the older palace servants. On certain nights, if you stood in the lower halls of the palace, the air would grow cold. If you listened carefully, you could hear women singing in Latin, a language that had no place in an Ottoman palace, a language that should have been buried along with the women who spoke it. The diplomat dismissed it as superstition, the foolish beliefs of uneducated servants. But the walls don't lie. What these 18 women understood, what they proved through the simple act of carving and remembering and refusing to disappear, is something that empires can never truly comprehend. You can conquer land, you can rewrite history, you can erase names from ledgers and bury bodies in unmarked graves. You can dress your victims in silk and parade them through the streets as proof of your power. But you cannot kill what people carry inside them. You cannot silence what they carve into stone. You cannot erase what they whisper into darkness. And you cannot prevent history from finding its way backward to uncover the truth. Sister Magdalena carved her bird, knowing she would never leave that palace, knowing her name would be forgotten, knowing the world would move on without her. But she carved it anyway, because she understood something that Hassan Pasha and the Sultan and the entire Ottoman military apparatus could never understand. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. For centuries, those words remained invisible, buried beneath layers of paint and time. But they survived, just like the women survived, not as living bodies, that mercy was denied them, but as memory, as defiance, as proof that even in the deepest darkness, even when everything has been taken away, some things cannot be erased. In 2011, when archaeologists held their lights up to those scratched walls and read those Latin words for the first time in nearly 500 years, they were discovering something more than historical artifacts. They were witnessing the final victory of 18 women over an empire that had devoted its resources to making them disappear. The Ottoman Empire is gone now. Its sultans are dust. Its armies are memory. Its monuments crumble in the Mediterranean sun. But those crosses remain. That Latin phrase remains. And the bird that Sister Magdalena drew remains. A small mark made by a woman's hand, bearing witness across centuries to the truth that even empires cannot kill. We endured. We were here. We refused to disappear. And now, because you've listened, because you've chosen to remember, they're still here. The women of St. Catherine are still singing, their light is still shining, and the darkness, for all its power, has still not overcome.